Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fuqua's LinkedIn Live series, where every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Fuqua faculty come live to you on LinkedIn and bring you some of the perspective that researchers have on what's going on in our world. I'm Victor Bennett, and I do most of my research on technology and startups and the dominance of established companies. You might recognize me from previous sessions on automation and COVID, and on how COVID is affecting entrepreneurship. Today, I'm going to be talking about prospects for small business under the Biden administration. And at the end, I'll be taking some of your questions. So please feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll do my best. So first things first, I am not a totally disinterested party on this subject. I worked in the Obama White House as the senior economist for technology and competition policy, though I didn't work directly with Biden. And second, I do some consulting and advising with small firms and venture capital firms. That said, my job here is to bring you my completely unbiased view. Okay, second thing second, I can't see the future. I don't know the answers with certainty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to describe to you how I break down the question and then what I learned in discussions with some of the other faculty who are more expert than I on particular issues. Okay, so formally, the executive branch actually has much less authority than people seem to think. What they can do is they can guide priorities by choosing and appointing staff and directing the policy conversation, which is something often called the bully pulpit. So from here on out, when I say the Biden administration, I'm actually including all of the policy things that look like they're going to happen during this administration. All right, so let's go. If you saw my session on entrepreneurship and COVID, you know that I feel strongly that lumping all small businesses together can really obscure some of the really important distinctions between them. Small businesses can be businesses that never intended to grow. That can include everything from businesses where the founder wanted to be a small business for personal reasons, or businesses where it doesn't make sense to grow, like a dentist's office or something like that. Businesses can also be, or small businesses can also be things that want to grow, but either haven't yet, or there's some kind of barrier that's going to hold them back. So I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to address the second one first. So businesses that are going to grow are super important to the economy because most of jobs are created by growing firms, most new jobs. And growth for them can depend on a lot of different things. So I'm going to talk about four here. So the first one is financing. Access to financing can be critical for growth. And the signs on that front look pretty positive. In fact, like maybe too positive right now. Given very low interest rates, making it cheaper to borrow money, and investors not having a ton of outside options in the market, I can see a lot of money going into venture financing. Also, I can see the barrier for local bank loans being maybe a little bit lower. Another thing that's really critical for small businesses is access to supplies and markets. So what does that mean? Well, those supplies can range from things like the raw materials they need to make their products or the infrastructure they need to participate in the economy. So inputs can be everything from rare earth metals that you need to manufacture something, intermediate goods like parts that you're going to assemble into something bigger. It can be things like the postal service that you use to ship things, or it can be internet broadband that you need to, for example, do your job working from home, if anyone's had that experience. There are some really interesting things going on in this space. There are great moves like the FCC's effort on rural broadband and potentially more infrastructure spending, fingers crossed. The Biden administration isn't moving as far on Trump-era import tariffs as I would ideally like to be able to access raw materials, but we'll continue to see how that goes. Another thing that's really critical for these businesses is access to talent, right? Talent is super important to growing your business. A lot of businesses say their most important resource is their people. And it's becoming increasingly important actually with software, because what software does is allows you to have a much wider reach, which gives you much more leverage on any individual. So if you have a great marketer or a programmer, their effort can be spread over a much bigger market and can have a much bigger impact. Certainly early in my Google days, I remember that the effort of some of the world-class engineers we had reduced the response time of the Google homepage load by a few fractions of a second. With how big that website was in terms of how many people used it, that actually led to major changes in revenues and the ability to grow the firm. In the old days of smaller markets, being able to change your response time by a few seconds probably wouldn't have changed very much. And so folks like that can have a magnitude of impact that they never would have had before. So for small US firms to be able to benefit from people like that, there's a few things that we need. In the past, the difficulty of requesting H-1B visas made it so that pretty much only the biggest companies that had in-house legal teams could request it. And that meant that small businesses rarely got access to world-class talent from outside the US. This is something that I've seen echoed in the experiences of a lot of our alums who came to the US from other countries. They really, really wanted to work in startups. They are incredibly talented and would have been tremendous contributors, but they had to go work at bigger firms that had the resources to be able to sponsor their visas. Second, small businesses need access to the talent that Americans currently outside the labor force could bring. So things like access to healthcare or childcare could bring people who are exceptionally talented, but aren't in the workforce right now into the workforce. And that could be super important. And then the last thing is that there are a ton of Americans who are super, super smart, but don't have the training necessary to do some of the jobs that companies are really needing. And so to cultivate those talents, it would be great to have more funding for education or making it easier for them to access that education. Under the new Secretary of Education, it looks like there's signs that we're going to get some more education funding, but we'll see how that goes. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. And last, but certainly not least, policy clarity is actually super important. So if you think about it, a company is probably going to wait until there's some certainty about the returns to an investment before they make really long-term investments. And signaling that policy isn't going to be too erratic is actually really helpful for those smaller companies to make commitments, even for the biggest companies. I mean, the area that I'm most familiar with on this dimension is autonomous vehicles. And autonomous vehicles come from both super big companies like Amazon, who owns Zoox and Waymo, to much smaller companies like Voyage and Otto. And those companies are really hesitant to make big long-term investments because they're not sure what regime of laws they're going to have to prepare for. And they're happy to make an investment in any regime. So any clarity will let them move forward, but they need that clarity before they'll do it. Switching to businesses that are choosing to remain small. This is a super interesting area of conversation. So these businesses don't create a ton of jobs over time, largely because they tend to stay small, and they don't get to use the economies of scale of really big firms, but they're really important. They're important for a few reasons. One is that they keep variety in the product market. I know a lot of people lament about going to different areas where all of the coffee shops are the same, for example, and that the food is pretty similar area to area, and that can make travel less interesting, and it can reduce variety in the product market. The other thing is that the work culture of a mom and pop business can be really different. And for those two reasons, people consider it a really important part of the American landscape. I certainly do. So Biden talked a lot about family businesses on the campaign trail. I expect some action there from the current administration, but I don't really know what to expect yet. I can talk a little bit about this in the questions. Yeah, I don't know. So this is a tough one because a lot of the efforts that we've seen so far to support small businesses have come not really from the government, but actually from consumers themselves. So you'll start to see, especially in Durham, people talking about buying local, Small Business Saturday, things like that, that help support local businesses. And those have relatively small impact compared to what we'd like to see and what is required to actually keep these businesses going. So one exception to the argument that the administration is doing relatively little on this is the PPP. That's a little bit of an exception. There's been some criticism about the distribution of the PPP, that it hasn't necessarily gone to the right businesses, and that it's not enough to keep these businesses surviving for long enough to actually wait out COVID. I think those are both really very reasonable criticisms. It's going to be interesting to see if it's extended or what else comes out. One thing that's interesting, though, that I like about it is that it's indicative of some support on this dimension, and that they were able to turn something around really fast. And I would hope to be able to see more of that. So those are my thoughts. I'm happy to start taking questions. All right. Okay. It looks like I've got a couple of questions already. Thank you very much. So the first one is a question about the Buy American initiative that Biden's been talking about. That's really interesting. I really wish I could be more positive on it, honestly. So the headline that people are talking about from the Buy American initiative is the federal spending on IT. So basically the argument is going to be that the government will spend more on small domestic firms from their IT spending, and that that's actually going to help cultivate this market. That's really nice, but here's why I'm afraid that it's not going to have major impact. So only 25% of IT spending goes to SBA defined small businesses, and many of those are already American. So the gains we're going to see from this are only going to be the changes from the small businesses that weren't American, replacing them with American firms. Now, for manufacturing, 96% of spending is on American firms. And so if we think that the IT suppliers that could serve the government are similar to the ones that could serve the rest, or that could serve the manufacturing market, then we're talking about 4% of the 25%. I'm sure there are a ton of exceptions. I'm sure the executive order can make a bigger difference, but if you take that back of the envelope calculation, you multiply it by total government IT spending, it looks like it's going to be about a $10 million difference. There's about 30 million small businesses in the United States, so I don't expect a super huge change. Okay, next question. This is very on brand for the Duke audience. It's a question about medical practices, and I think that's a fascinating question. I will start off by saying that this is something I've thought about quite a lot, but the tremendous, the expertise at Fuqua lies with Ronnie Chatterjee and David Ridley, who you've seen in prior LinkedIn Lives, and I hope we can get them to talk about this. So here's what I think is going on. We have seen a ton of consolidation in medical care delivery. There are many fewer single doctor practices. There are many fewer independent hospitals. And there's also this rise of new large-scale chains of providers like Minute Clinic, for example, or individual diagnostic clinics that are chains. So, we're starting to see some from like Quest Diagnostics, or for specialized verticals, there's like DaVita for kidney dialysis. Now, the concentration here is tough because it seems to be resulting in the closure of some rural hospitals. And that's a really big issue, not just for the health of rural populations, but also because in a lot of less populated communities, some of the best local jobs are actually in the health system. You have a lot of technician jobs that don't require a college education, but pay quite well. They bring doctors to the community and people with higher salaries who can spend more. We have a question from Katrinka McCallum, who is a proud alum, saying, what conversations is Biden having with governors to create a blend of federal as well as state programs to support smaller businesses? That is a great question. And I don't know the answer because I don't know what is going on inside the administration. What I am starting to see is some discussion of greater funding to local communities. And I'm really glad you asked that because we're starting to see some trends towards local counties actually beginning to go bankrupt, particularly because a lot of them rely a lot on sales tax revenue to keep themselves funded. And so during COVID, with more people working from home, buying less from from restaurants, and a lot less tourism, a lot of these counties are being stretched really thin on the revenue side, while also often having increasing costs on the public health side, which is stretching them really thin. So Katrinka, I'm sorry, I just echoed that that's a really important question, but I don't know the answer yet. And I'll look forward to seeing what movement we actually get. I think that's going to be really important. Okay, Syed says, what do you expect regarding the infrastructure spending? Okay, so this is a Victor speculate question. So FCC broadband spending is the first one that I see changing dramatically because that's something that was on the increase before, but under Ajit Pai actually took a big step backward. Some of the other infrastructure that I would love to see is road improvement, bridge improvements. Some of you may remember that years ago, a major bridge in Minnesota, I believe, collapsed that actually separated commuters from jobs, making it really difficult to get to work. I would love to see more spending on infrastructure there. I would love to see more spending on the Postal Service. Those are two areas where I think there's movement within the administration. Now, the question is going to be getting those bills through Congress. And it's really, really up for debate, particularly because of the very recent stimulus spending. So I'm curious to see what kind of appetite there is for big infrastructure spending after a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. But I would love to see more. And to Katrinka's point, also, I would love to see some of that going to the local communities. I think that would be really critical to keeping these communities afloat and helping them support the businesses that are there. Okay, so I've got one last question, so I'm going to go ahead and take that one. Thank you all so much. Okay, so the last question is actually in relation to some news that has come out over the last couple days. There's been some discussion about big firms like Amazon and Google, particularly in tech, and whether or not it would be good for the economy to break them up. And there are some people who are very bullish on the possibilities of breaking them up, and some who are much less bullish. I have strong feelings about this. I think I am generally, I lean less towards thinking of breakups as being the primary way to solve a lot of the issues that are associated with single big firms like pricing, privacy, and employment. But Tim Wu and Lina Khan, who have recently been announced as joining the executive branch, are very strong proponents of that. So I would not at all be surprised if there's movement on that front. So those are my thoughts. Don't take them to the bank, but I hope you find them interesting. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been really fun. Next week is going to be really fun, probably more fun than me. One of my favorite colleagues, Mary Frances Luce, is going to be talking about some of the challenges that the health system is facing with value-based care implementation, which is an incredibly important issue for policy and also for our personal health, which is really in the spotlight right now and something that a lot of us have on our minds. So please follow Fuqua on LinkedIn. It'll make sure that you are reminded of and don't miss any of the events. It's been a great pleasure, and I'll see you.